And we now come to statement from Secretary of State Kemi Badenoch.
With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the UK's trade performance. When I'm overseas as Secretary of State for Business and Trade, other countries speak with nothing but admiration and respect for what we are achieving in Britain. As the CEO of Nissan Global recently remarked, it's surprising to hear people asking why they should choose the UK. In his words, we have both great people and great talent here. Certainly in the firms I've visited up and down this country, I'm proud to see our employers and exporters firing on all cylinders. Yet, when I return to Westminster, some people seem unaware of the progress that we have made as an independent trading nation. Today, I want to put that right. The latest trade data, published by the Office for National Statistics, and also that published by the UN Conference on Trade and Development, should give everyone in this House cause for celebration and renewed pride in our country. They confirm that the strategy the public voted for on 23rd of June 2016 is delivering. Leaving the European Union was a vote of confidence in the project of the United Kingdom, and we are seeing results. Since that referendum, the UK economy has grown faster than Germany, Italy, and Japan. And contrary to gloomy predictions, our manufacturing productivity has grown more than Germany, France, Italy, and the USA. According to the latest UN statistics, the UK, outside the EU, became the world's fourth biggest exporter in 2022, overtaking Japan, the Netherlands, and France. The value of UK exports was $862 billion in the 12 months to February 2024. This builds on progress we have made in growing our exports outside the confines of the EU. Exports are now 2% above 2018 when adjusted for inflation. Services exports are at an all-time high. A summary of these figures, along with the most recent business and labour stats, were published on gov.uk in April. Together, Madam Deputy Speaker, these definitively disprove the claims of those who prophesied a catastrophic economic collapse when we left the EU to become a sovereign nation. Today, we are not only selling more services to EU countries than ever before, we are selling record amounts of services to the rest of the world too. We are the largest net exporter of financial and insurance services in the world. Far from an exodus of businesses out of the UK, European firms have doubled down on their commitment to the UK. In 2020, Unilever chose to headquarter exclusively in London over Rotterdam. Since 2022, Cadbury has brought more chocolate production back to the UK from Germany. In the same year, Shell moved its headquarters out of the Netherlands and into the UK. And we are tearing down the barriers to trade. Since the start of 2022, we've resolved barriers all over the world estimated to be worth over £15 billion over a 5-year period to UK businesses. In 2023, this was equivalent to removing around £1 million of trade barriers every single hour. British pork farmers are benefiting from newly agreed access to the Mexican market, worth £18 million over the same period. Our work on bottle labelling for UK gin and whiskey has driven up tons in exports to Chile. We have ended the US ban on British beef and lamb. We are working to deliver a strategy that faces the whole world, not just our friends and neighbours in Europe. This is crucial if we are to lock Britain into the future of where global growth will be. In 2022, the EU took over 60% of UK goods exports. In 2023, this was 47% because UK goods exports to the EU remained broadly flat, while exports to non-EU countries rose by around 70% in real terms. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are going further to seize the benefits of an independent trade policy. We have deals with 73 countries around the world, with more to come under this government, plus the most comprehensive trade deal the EU has ever agreed to. Later this year, we will join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, one of the world's biggest trading blocs. This will mean over 99% of UK goods eligible for zero tariffs in some of the Asia-Pacific's most dynamic economies. British business is set to benefit. As well as the service exports, where Britain excels, our top goods sales were in cars, mechanical power generators, medicines, pharmaceutical products, and aircraft components. We have one of the world's largest manufacturing sectors. Productivity in our manufacturing industry has grown faster than in every other G7 nation since 2010. Hundreds of businesses in steel, chemicals and other sectors stand to benefit from the newly introduced British Industry Supercharger, which is bringing energy costs down for key industries. Our £4.5 billion advanced manufacturing plan is opening new markets and removing obstacles to growth while helping to crowd in new funding for plants and factories throughout the UK. Every penny the government spends on manufacturing is matched fivefold by the growth creators of the private sector. This pro-investment approach is working. The UK's automotive sector attracted £3.7 billion of greenfield foreign investment in 2022 alone. The Labour Party will remember, of course, Mr. Alistair Campbell, who asserted during the referendum that if we leave the EU, Nissan leaves. Nissan is still here. And the two new 100% electric models are set to be built in their Sunderland plant this year. And more Minis are rolling off production lines in Oxfordshire today, thanks to a £600 million investment from BMW. These are people who look for opportunities the world over and decide that the UK is the place to be. But to listen to some of the remarks made in this House and elsewhere, you would come away thinking our country wasn't even worth investing in at all. Let us be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the British ingenuity and industry which made this country prosper in the past still exists today, and even if those sitting opposite cannot see it, international investors certainly can. The statistics published by my department show that the UK's inward FDI stock has reached over £2 trillion. Our FDI stock is the highest in Europe, more than Germany and France and Italy, EU countries combined. The most recent OECD data shows that our employment rate is higher than the US, France and Italy. The regulatory freedoms we gained by leaving the EU mean our smarter regulation programme has been cutting back the red tape that's been holding them back. We've already reformed the Working Time Directive reporting requirements, saving businesses up to £1 billion per year. We recently announced that we will raise the thresholds that determine company size, reducing burdens on smaller businesses, and remove low-value and overlapping reporting requirements. These changes, Madam Deputy Speaker, will make reporting simpler, deliver savings of around £150 million per year to UK companies, with small and medium-sized companies benefiting by around £145 million. It is no surprise the most recent NatWest SME Business Activity Index shows that output is increasing strongly, driven by renewed manufacturing sector expansion, and companies' activity expectations remain upbeat. These things do not happen by accident, and I hope honourable members on both sides of this House will welcome these figures. I have no doubt that this will disappoint some people, as it does not align with the story they want to tell of a nation riven by injustice and economic stagnation, clinging to Europe for any hope for the future. This is not to say that everything is perfect. Of course, there is still more to do. But we are not alone in our problems. Yeah. Ministers in other countries are quick to remind me about supply chain issues affecting everything from getting car components to stocking supermarket shelves. They tell me about how they are coping with problems in the jobs market as societies from Germany to Japan get older. It is only when I am back in the UK that I am told that all these issues are down to Brexit. Far from it. Our plans are working, and Britain is thriving as an independent, sovereign home of free enterprise and free trade. This is what these recent figures published by my department, by the ONS and by the UN tell me. It is what our businesses, exporters, employers and investors all tell me, and I hope that honourable members here today can see this too. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Gareth Hodge.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in the usual way, I say that I am grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement. And whilst I'm always pleased to hear of any positive news on trade and investment, there do appear to be one or two facts and issues missed out, presumably inadvertently, from the Secretary of State's statement. Under the party opposite, business has suffered under endless U-turns and policy changes that undermine investment. There have been constant changes on policy such as net zero through to corporate governance, and the government's failure to address the big challenges facing business, like skills shortages, infrastructure issues and net zero, have undermined business confidence. Foreign direct investment figures are down nearly 30% since 2016-17, according to the government's own figures. Without an industrial strategy and with constant policy uncertainty, more businesses won't have the confidence to invest in the UK. Specifically on trade, British exports in the last decade have grown slower than any member of the G7 beside Japan. According to the OBR, since the Secretary of State was appointed, British exports have dropped and are expected to decline again this year, with at best anemic growth expected in each of the next 3 years. Ministers have cut funding to help small businesses get to the international trade shows they need to go to find new export markets, and have cut funding to allow business groups to lead their own trade missions to win vital new orders for British business. Farmers and members on the Secretary of State's own side think the government's record on trade negotiations is one of giving away far too much for far too little in return. Ministers delivered a poor trade deal with Europe, which has put up barriers to trade, raised costs to businesses and helped drive up prices. And there's no sign of any plan to use next year's review of the TCA to try and address at least some of these issues. And then, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is the failure to deliver the promises in their manifesto on trade at the last general election, to have trade agreements in place with at least 80% of the world. There's the failure to deliver the promised trade deal with the United States, which was in their manifesto. And then, too, there's the target to deliver £1 trillion of exports, a target that has been moved many times and will at best be delivered 15 years late. So perhaps the Right Honourable Lady could use today's statement to answer the following questions. Last week we heard the impact of the government's constant flip-flopping is having on the automotive sector, with Stellantis airing serious warnings. So what discussions has she had with the Transport Secretary to try and mitigate this impact of the party opposite's chaos? And as we get the devastating news continuing from South Wales, we have heard next to nothing from the Secretary of State on the damages she has allowed to our steel industry. So does she still think spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to make thousands of people redundant and leave us as the first developed country with no primary steel making capacity was a great deal, as she said at the time? And given that this House has repeatedly been promised an amazing trade deal with India, usually by Diwali, can she update the House on the state of FTA negotiations with India? And lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, given recent concerning media reports at the weekend, can she update the House on whether FTA negotiations with the GCC are still ongoing or whether they have stalled?
Secretary of State.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. I could see that it was very difficult for him to find things to pick out in the statement. So I will welcome broadly some of what he's saying, which implies that the good news is true. He started off with the OBR. This is a very selective statistic that he has picked. If you look at exports during COVID, of course, they fell. Exports overall have grown. Many people on the opposite side of the House will say, oh, it's just services. That is because they don't understand the UK economy. The UK economy is 80% services. So it is good that it is services exports that are going up. That is what we mainly do in this country. The honourable gentleman asked about Stellantis and talked about U-turns. I would remind him that the whole House voted for the net zero target by 2050. This was something that happened under a previous Conservative government, but with consent in the whole House. And when business talks, we listen. They criticised us for making the changes that Stellantis asked for. So why is he now raising the comments? We extended the ZEV mandate. Transport Secretary, Prime Minister and myself had a discussion. We do have discussions. We extended that ZEV mandate to make sure that we were not imposing undue costs on people if they were not ready to take up electric vehicles. We listen, they don't. We look at the plans which they have for net zero, and I assure him businesses are absolutely terrified about what they will do with their new Green Deal and all of the things that will just put costs on business and consumers. He asked about steel. I'm afraid I need to correct several things. We saved jobs in Port Talbot. 8,000 jobs were going to be lost. We saved 5,000. If you want a net zero transition, you will have to move to an electric arc furnace. This is what happens. It uses fewer staff. You cannot blame the government for that while demanding a transition to net zero. We saved 5,000 jobs in Port Talbot. We invested £500 million out of a total £2 billion investment with Tata. It is wrong to say that this government is not saving steel. We're the only ones who have a plan for steel. They have no plan. We have a great plan, and it is going to transform and regenerate South Wales. The other thing which he said, which is incorrect, is about us having no primary steel steel production. We still have British Steel in Scunthorpe. There may be changes in Port Talbot around going to electric arc furnaces, but what he needs to remember is that even the steel production we have here relies on imports. We do not have iron ore here. So I would recommend that he gets a briefing on exactly what is going on with steel production in the UK. On India, he is right that it was promised a deal by Diwali under a previous Prime Minister, but as soon as I became Trade Secretary, I said in this House over and over again, it is about the deal, not the day. We do not sign trade deals in this House that will not make businesses happy. We are keen to make sure that whatever we do is going to do right by our farmers. They laughed on the opposite sides of the bench when I paused FTA discussions with Canada. That was because what they were offering was not going to be good. They have complained that the industry there is complaining that the UK got too good a deal from CPTPP. They don't talk about that. But we are negotiating great deals for this country. I'm very proud of the work that my ministers and my department are doing, and I would thank him for his questions.
Sir John Redwood.
I'm very grateful for the statement. I think it's wonderful news on the exports, showing all that pessimism at the time of the referendum was completely wrong. And I fully support the Minister's approach to delaying the target for battery vehicles because people aren't buying them in enough quantities. But will she add to that by adopting the Stellantis advice, which is not fining motor manufacturers here for producing good petrol and diesel cars before people are ready to buy the electric ones, because that is putting off investors.
I understand very much the point that the right honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, is making. This is something that we have heard from some bodies in industry. We have the auto sector giving us two different messages. Some want us to bring the mandate forward and make it happen faster. Others want us to delay it. It is a very tricky balance. We do understand the concerns. We don't want to put additional burdens on business. So he is right to make that point. I have made representations to the Transport Secretary, but this is his policy area, and he will make the ultimate decision.
SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, with these selected statistics, the Secretary would clearly make a very good cherry picker while she clutches at straws at the same time. The reality is we still have a cost of living crisis, and I would welcome her to my constituency to tell people in my constituency how rosy apparently things are in the UK at the moment. The reality is, real GDP growth in the UK compared to pre-pandemic is just 1%. That's a third of the EU average figure and an eighth of the US growth. And the here and now figures are even worse. The UK economy shrank in 2023, whereas with significant growth in the G7 and across the OECD average. Indeed, now is probably the only time in living history the UK economy is actually on a par with Germany, but sadly that's because Germany is also an international outlier in terms of lack of economic growth. Volumes of UK goods imports and exports is 7.4% smaller compared to 2018. That's the biggest 5-year decline for which comparative records exist. And the Secretary is right, exports to the EU are up, but imports for the EU are also up. So the trading deficit with the EU is actually increased by over 5%. And yesterday, with the introduction of new customs and checks procedures on animal and plant products coming into the UK, which alliance trade is estimated will cost British businesses £2 billion a year. UK Energy estimates energy bills are currently £1 billion a year higher due to post-Brexit trading arrangements. So instead of talking up the minimum savings in what she calls cutting red tape, I wish you'd come here and tell the truth on what the actual Brexit red tape trading cost increases are to businesses in the UK, not to mention the impact of labour shortages. Madam Deputy Speaker, this Parliament is set to break a lot of records. The biggest drop in living standards, the longest decline in GDP per capita, the steepest 5-year decline in volume of trade, the stock market shrinking at its fastest pace in history. So what of these record-breaking achievements for broken Britain is she most proud of?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was very interesting to hear the honourable gentleman talk about his constituent. What he should tell his constituents, certainly what I would if I was there, would tell them that the 7-year administration of First Minister Nicola Scotland, the SNP welfare economy grew at half the growth rate of England. If the SNP had achieved growth in line with England, they could have increased Scotland's economy by 15 billion. Instead, that welfare economy means no growth because of the highest income tax rates in the UK, higher wages in the public sector than in the private sector. Their policies are not helping. He asks questions. He doesn't want to hear the facts, but I will give him the facts. He asks questions about pre-pandemic GDP. He talks about the real pre-pandemic GDP figure. Of course, the pandemic had an impact. We cannot be here and pretend that it did not. Even the statistics that I'm quoting show that COVID had a far bigger impact than leaving the European Union ever will, just as Russia's war in Ukraine would have a far bigger impact than leaving the EU. He talks about international outliers, which shows that he is the one who is cherry-picking. We have to look at our peer countries. We're not going to grow as quickly as developing countries, and it's actually astonishing that he is complaining that imports from the EU are also up. That shows that despite leaving the European Union, trade is going well, things are going well, and I believe that if his Scottish government actually takes some lessons from the UK government, they would see much better happening for their constituents.
Mark Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today, especially welcome the fact that I think 5 or 6 occasions Japan was mentioned. The latest statistics show that there's been a £777 million increase in total trade between our two countries, which works out at 2.9%. And I would also welcome the Secretary of State to come to an event that we're hosting along with Becker Mackenzie, first week of June, which is launching Becker Mackenzie's UK-Japan Connect, which is seeking to foster business trade between our two countries.
Secretary of State.
Thank my honourable friend for that question. I will check my diary to see if I'm available for the event, but I'm really glad that he raises the trade with Japan. We signed an upgraded FTA with Japan after leaving the EU, so these rollover deals are no longer rollover deals. We're adding more into them, especially the digital trade chapters. So these are deals that are fit for the 21st century, fit for the age we live in now rather than the 20th century.
Chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's good to see the Secretary of State in the House again. I know she has a difference of opinion sometimes with the OBR, but could she confirm that the OBR's figures for March 2024 do show that the UK now has the lowest trade intensity in the G7? There was important progress that she's reported today, and much of it rests on progress in our services trade. That does provoke the question as to why we're not pursuing services only trade agreements in a more expansive way, not least because the Minister for Trade was unable to confirm any comprehensive free trade deals will be signed before the election when he came before the committee yesterday. And he said services only deals were not allowed under WTO rules, which of course is just flat wrong. But the question I want to put to the Secretary of State, Madam Deputy Speaker, today is about our goods trade, because the ONS stats show that our goods exports have fallen by about £31 billion over the course of a year, and the risk is that that number is hit even harder by the chaos at the border. The new border operating model involves data that is submitted by traders but isn't then shared with ports. Sometimes 2 hours notice is needed for a journey that only takes 90 minutes. There's no standardisation of inspection charges, and the British Chamber of Commerce says that many businesses are going to be hit by thousands of pounds worth of customs bills that they didn't know they were on the hook for. So the question, Madam Deputy Speaker, is did the Secretary of State warn her colleagues in Cabinet that there was going to be complete chaos and that the EU checks that we're now introducing are going to be a disaster? Because that is what small business is saying to me, and I know it's what small business is saying to her.
Secretary of State.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his questions. He asked about why we're not pursuing services-only deals. We have done 2 of those, one with Singapore and one with Ukraine, about a digital trade exclusively. This is obviously an area where you need both sides to agree, and actually most countries still want a goods deal. For many of the countries that we're negotiating with, goods are still the larger part of their economy, and we have to bear that in mind. Trade deals are not a one-way story. I'm glad that he welcomes my statement. He will, of course, know that I am not somebody who pretends that absolutely everything is perfect and nothing could be better. I do think that things could be improved. But one of the things that we have to acknowledge, in reference to his comment about the border operating model, is that the people voted to leave the European Union. There will be opportunities and there will be costs. One of the things that farmers regularly tell us is that they want better food standard checks and other checks at the border. That will impose a cost. We have done everything we can to minimise those costs. We've even found cost savings in doing so. I've heard many scare stories about what businesses will see at the border. Not all of them will apply. We're doing everything that we can in order to minimise the burden. But the fact is the EU imposed the same thing on the other side. We need to give our producers a level playing field.
Julie Marsden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Chairman of the Business and Trade Select Committee. As a relatively new member who joined this year, I recall my first meeting, we heard how the UK has the third highest level of foreign direct investment over the past years, behind only the US and China. And this week, at my last meeting with her colleague on the front bench now, we heard about our trade deals with over 70 countries, including the landmark CPTPP. Does my right honourable friend agree that this track record of success contrasts starkly with Labour's track record, where the UK's share of global trade declined, and that just perhaps, aside from the chairman of the Select Committee, there isn't a single Labour backbencher there who wants to hear the track record of success, and they don't have a leg to stand on?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. She is right, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman opposite, being a trade minister at the time, could verify those figures about trade dropping. He's shaking his head, but in answer to her question, yes, those 73 trade deals, we were often mocked as never being able to get them done, that nobody would sign any deals with the UK that we had in the EU. We got 73 done, and many of them we've actually improved on. I think that one of the things we in this House must do is remind people about a lot of the good that we have done, which they may forget. If people live in the moment, we have to remind them of our record, and this is a record that we should be very proud of.
Paul Girvan.
Thank you. Secretary of State, much as we welcome the good figures that have been produced and put forward, Northern Ireland still suffers from not having full access to the trade deals that the United Kingdom have struck throughout the world with those other 70 countries. What measures can be taken to ensure that we can take advantage of those and get rid of the injustice of the protocol and the difficulties that it gives to businesses in Northern Ireland?
Chief State.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. There is a lot that we have been doing on in Northern Ireland to increase investment and to make up for wherever it is that there seems to be a shortfall, whether it is in the trade deals that we are doing or elsewhere. The Windsor Framework, for example, is one of the things that the Prime Minister has worked on in order to iron out some of those issues. What we are working on for Northern Ireland is looking at where they can exploit both the single market and also the benefits of being part of the UK single market as well. It is a unique position. We know that there are some areas where it is not exactly the same as the UK, but what we can do is look individually in specific trade deals. If there are things that we can do around services, for example, should not be an issue at all. Goods is where is really where we see that difference. There's a lot more that we can do, and we continue to work on it.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that if we cast our minds back to the time of COVID, when we were spending hundreds of billions of pounds just to try and keep the country functioning, no one could ever have imagined sets of statistics as positive as those she has given us today? And may I re-emphasise the point already made in slightly different terms? There appear to be 8 times as many people sitting on our front bench as on the entirety of the Labour backbenches. And does she take that as a vote of confidence in the government's positive message?
Secretary of State. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It's clear that Labour don't like good news, because as soon as there is any, they exit the chamber unless they absolutely have to be here. I think it is disgraceful that there is not a single backbench Labour MP other than the chair of the Select Committee. The honourable lady is blushing because she knows it is true. But this is one of the reasons why it is important for us not to assume that people see these statistics. If we don't talk about it, nobody else will. There are enough people out there, certainly on all these benches, who are there to tell us how terrible everything is. We need to remind people about the good that is happening. I thank him for his question.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In complete contrast to the rosy picture that the government is trying to paint. Here's some inconvenient truth that has been left out. New checks on food imports from the EU from this week will see costs for importers rise by 60%, with severe impacts on small businesses and consumers alike. So can the Secretary of State take this opportunity to maybe lay out how consumers and small businesses are going to be protected from these severe new costs?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I seem to remember a time when some Liberal Democrats were complaining that we didn't have any checks at the border, and that showed that standards in this country are low. If we do something, they immediately make the opposite argument. There is no consistency whatsoever. I explained in an earlier question why we are doing this and how it is benefiting. It is about maintaining standards. But the other thing that she should realise is that we have also been able to reduce tariffs on loads of products, thousands of products from across the world, which are also helping to reduce prices and tackle inflation.
Theo Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, can I welcome today the announcement from the Secretary of State on the progress the government is making on business and trade. It's fantastic news to hear that the UK has been the 4th biggest exporter in the world. As the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Kenya, I've been meeting very regularly with British businesses to understand better how the government can help them to export to this key market. And during my most recent visit to Nairobi, I've been focused on delivering the UK's flagship projects, including Nairobi Railway City and the Grand High Falls Dam. So can I ask my right honourable friend to continue to remove barriers for British businesses to ensure that they can grow their exports to key markets such as Kenya?
Secretary of State.
First of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Lady my Honourable friend, for all the work that she has been doing as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Kenya. She will know that officials have been engaging with their Kenyan counterparts to progress work on market access barriers, including working closely with UK industry and Kenya's anti-counterfeit agency to address issues which face British exporters. There is a lot of work that we are doing to deepen collaboration between UK and Kenya. They want our expertise, and especially in important sectors like healthcare and financial services, and I hope that I'll be able to work more with her in order to deliver more trade between our two countries.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for her positivity in relation to, and I think it's encouraging to have that positivity coming from the Minister, and it's good for this House, it's good for this country, this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Figures have shown from 21 to 23 there's been a slight, I asked this question constructively by the way, there's been a slight decrease in the numbers of new jobs created in the United Kingdom. What discussions has the Minister had, the Secretary of State had with the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Industry in Northern Ireland at the Assembly in relation to Northern Ireland's contribution for the provision of creating new employment for the year 24-25 period, so that the figures can remain on the increase as they did for the years prior to 2021. Thank you so much.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I think that the point that he's making is that we cannot be complacent about what is happening in either country. Even now, as we talk about good news, things could disappear if we don't continue working at them. He is right that we should do as much as we can with the Department for Enterprise and Industry. I think now that we have a minister in place, which we didn't have before, it'll be a lot easier for us to coordinate and see how we can work together in order to increase employment and improve wages and productivity in both countries.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, which was particularly encouraging. It was particularly encouraging to hear the news about the manufacturing sector. But she will be aware that if we're to continue the growth of that sector, there will need, in some sectors, for continued government support. Can she confirm that that will be forthcoming?
Secretary of State.
The manufacturing sector is one which we have put in place a £4.5 billion advanced manufacturing plan. This is an area where firms will need to make sure that they qualify for some of that funding. But we are also doing what we can in order to bring in investment, especially foreign investment. That is what is going to help drive productivity. And it's good to see that businesses globally and investors globally want to invest all across the UK, not just in London, not just in financial services, certainly in manufacturing, in our green industries, offshore, renewables, so much that we can do that is going to create industries and companies that are fit for the future.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable friend on ensuring that these superb trade figures are indeed brought to the attention of Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, trade between the UK and Morocco has grown consistently since the entry into force of the UK-Morocco Association Agreement. Just last month, a UK consortium won the tender to design the Casablanca Stadium for the 2030 World Cup. This will be the second largest stadium in the world by seating capacity. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is thanks to Brexit that we can forge these one-to-one trade agreements that are bringing real benefits to British businesses? And does she share my view as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Morocco that we should continue to prioritise working with Morocco as a dynamic and growing trade partner?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he's absolutely right. I do think that we should continue to prioritise trade with Morocco and countries like Morocco. I remember when we had a tomato shortage in Western Europe, Morocco was one of the countries that had cheapest supplies, and we were able to we can drop tariffs on products like that when there are shortages that are affecting all of Western Europe, not just the UK. There is so much flexibility that comes from being able to have our own independent trade policy, and I want to pay tribute to him for the work that he does as trade envoy to Morocco, as I should have done to my honourable friend for his work as trade envoy to the Western Balkans as well. And there's so many trade envoys in the House today, and I'm grateful for all of the work that they do. They support our department and help to deliver these good news stories that we're talking about today.
Leonici.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Right Honourable friend's statement today, particularly with regard to growth with manufacturing and exporting. With areas such as Great Grimsby, we have a huge amount of opportunities with regard to things like carbon capture storage, but also our UK seafood processing industry, which is the biggest cluster in the country. Does she attribute some of that now growth developing with UK free ports, one of which is in Grimsby, and I look forward to welcoming her very, very soon.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And yes, free ports are another policy that have come about from our ability to leave the European Union. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we bring in that investment. And carbon capture under storage is one of those areas which we think the UK can lead. We have the expertise, we have a lot of the talent, we have a lot of the skills, and many of the people who want to understand this technology are coming to the UK. And I hope that there is more that we can do in Great Grimsby for her and for her constituents. And I will look into what we can do in order to make sure that either myself or another minister can come in and see the good work that is taking place in Great Grimsby.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hugely welcome the upbeat nature of this statement and the Secretary of State's reference to Britain joining CPTPP. Now, Snowdonia Cheese, based in my constituency, also looks forward to the UK's succession to CPTPP and the generous tariff-free access to the Canadian and Mexican markets that this will bring. It's understood this access may be available as soon as later this year. So would my right honourable friend kindly ask one of her officials to get in touch with the company to keep them updated on progress?
Secretary of State.
I'm very happy to do that. He is right that our accession to CPTPP is carrying on. We have ratified the bill in Parliament, as he will know, and 3 of the CPTPP countries have also completed this. There are only a handful to go. So I do think that this is something that will be possible, and I will arrange for officials to meet the business in his constituency to have that conversation.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, as we're here talking about progress of British business, it is telling that Labour MPs haven't bothered to show up. And if the Financial Times today is to believe, it's because they are desperately trying to find businesses to talk about the latest reversal of Labour Party policy, which is on their very damaging approach to the labour market, which would put additional laws on business, which would stifle enterprise and handed out more bungs to their paymasters in the trade unions. So does my right honourable friend agree that the right way to back British business is to get the right regulation, not the stifling legislation that the Labour Party will put in place?
Absolutely, I do agree with him. There is so much that we are doing in order to get our regulatory environment right, and I want to thank him for all of the work that he has done in this this area. I know it is something that he cares about, and I thank him for many of the suggestions and advice which he has provided to me. A regulatory environment, the right regulatory environment can and will deliver growth. I am terrified by some of the things which I see the Labour Party putting forward, and businesses don't like it either. There's flexible rights from day one, which means that you can employ someone and they don't turn up to work on their first day and you can't sack them, will be a disaster. We have done so much on labour rights. This is not the area that is going to deliver growth, certainly not the policies that they are putting forward.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Secretary of State's statements, particularly when it comes to manufacturing and exports. I want to thank her personally for the time she took yesterday to meet with Johnson Tiles, Churchill China and Steelite, great manufacturers of ceramics in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, as well as Rob Flello, the CEO of Ceramics UK. And despite what has been a very challenging time for the industry, particularly led by energy prices sparked by Vladimir Putin's illegal and immoral war in Ukraine, will the Secretary of State be able to assure me that the ceramics industry, particularly when it comes to some of the future free trade agreements with countries like India, will be able to fully take part and play a big role in making sure that we export the very best of Britain around the world?
Yes, that is right. What we are trying to do with our FTAs is make sure that we are delivering for businesses. If businesses aren't happy, then the FTAs will not work. The FTAs are going to be used by businesses, not by politicians. It's not by the photos. It's not about the photos that are being taken. And I thank him for the meeting which he organised yesterday with ceramic industries and ceramic producers in his constituency. We understand the difficulties that they face as energy costs have risen following the war in Ukraine. We're doing everything we can. I talked about the supercharger, which should help to deliver for those who are electricity users. We understand the changes that net zero and the burdens that net zero is placing on them. We're doing everything we can to mitigate them as we try and deliver that target.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I, like all my colleagues, very much warmly welcome this statement from the Right Honourable Lady. And I very much welcome her focus on balance of trade. I think we don't talk enough about that. And we forget that until 1997, this country had a broadly neutral or positive balance of trade, but between 1997 and 2010, that went very negative. And we have struggled to bring that back. And that has made us dependent on foreign debt and our economy fragile. So I very much welcome these figures. It looks like we are turning the tide. And I also welcome her focus on manufacturing. It has a very important part to play in our balance of trade. But we mustn't forget about the small manufacturers. Of course, she rightly focuses on the larger ones. But in my constituency, about nearly 6,000 jobs are dependent on export. So I just wonder what help is available to smaller manufacturers who often find there more barriers to exporting from the government to help them also be part of this excellent recovery.
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend makes a very good point. There is a lot that we are doing around our export strategy to provide support for those businesses that may not be familiar with exporting or need an additional help. This is work we do with our trade commissioners in every region around the world, and also international posts as well. One of the things that we have said in the Department for Business and Trade is that this is the year of the SME. Quite a lot of the time, the news that we give is the big billions for the big, the FTSE 100 companies, but most people who work in this country work for small and medium-sized businesses. So that's one of the reasons why we want to reduce the threshold at which they count for corporate reporting and regulations. That should make their lives easier and give them fewer barriers to trade, and that will help them improve their exports as well.
Thank you. That concludes proceedings on the statement. And we now come to the presentation of bills. Mr. Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
No. Excuse me.
Russian state assets and reconstruction of Ukraine bill.
Second reading what day?
17th of May, Madam Deputy Speaker.
17th of May. Thank you. Okay, I will pause in case people wish to come past before we go on to the next item of business.